off here with building a secure retirement, making work optional. So clearly, the goal for all of us is, the American dream, that we want to work for so many years and then we want to retire. It's a big shift in the mentality of the American workforce. Our parents before them, it was, they would just work their whole life and work as long as they possibly could, pay their bills and eventually die and leave whatever they have to their children. Our mindset, our goals now as employees, as the workforce, is we want to work as short amount of time as we can and stop working and enjoy those last few years, enjoy those last 20, 30 years of retirement by not working. And in order to do that, that takes a little bit of planning, and it takes some forethought and some strategy. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight is why that's necessary, and some of the steps that it's going to take to get you there, and how you can start. Because that's where I think a lot of us struggle is, well, okay, what do I need to do, and how do I start? So that's what we're going to go through tonight. Big problems people face with building a secure retirement are pensions. Some of our parents, you may know, and some even, my wife, she's still in the school system. So some people still have access to pensions, but a lot of Americans don't. The burden has fallen on us as Americans, as workforce, to create our own pensions, to create our own source of retirement funding. So that's problem number one is pensions. Problem number two is the sequence of return and risk. So, what's happening in the market? We don't get to control that. The timing of our retirement can really, and the timing of the market with our retirement can really impact our ability to retire based on market performance. Inflation, that's a big subject we're going to go over tonight, is inflation. What we think we need now, is $1 amount, but by the time we retire, how is that going to be impacted, or how do we need to adjust what we're doing now to account for the inflation that's going to happen between now and the time we retire, but then also from the time we retire, to the time we die, for the amount of the time we are in retirement. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about, and how to mitigate those risks and how to help us FIRE. What the acronym we've come up with, FIRE, is financial independence, retire early, and make work optional sooner. So it's kind of the goals as we go through this. So let's get going in here. Again, the old way, the old way of financial strategy was take on student loan debt, go to school, get a degree, get your W-2 job, pay off some debt, and save your money. That's really the basics most of us know about retiring, and that's just what we do. That's what we've been taught. The new way is find something like this. Find, an inspiration or a mentor. Honestly, for me, that's been Josh, the co-host, co-presenter on here with me. An inspiration or a mentor to help guide you through a different way of retiring. To be an entrepreneur, to gain financial literacy, learn how to leverage, and then, also how to invest. Those are the things that, we're going to talk about, the new way versus the old way in our financial strategy. So no longer pensions after 40 years. That's not the case. You've got to build your own retirement. And the way you're going to do that is you are either super frugal or you use leverage, because quite honestly, the math that we're going to go through tonight is simply against you if you are trying to do it the old way of just work, save, pay off debt, put money aside. That's not going to work. So let's go here.
Hey, Mike, I just want to check in. Is my audio okay?
Yep, you're great.
Sorry for the tech issues.
No, you're great. Introduce yourself. I've kind of introduced you a little bit, Josh, here, but why don't you take this slide here, actually?
Yeah, happy to do it. And sorry for the tech problems. I had an update that happened on my computer, so I apologize about that. But team, yeah, I mean, as Mike showed on the last slide, there's just a lot of challenge with the conventional model. We're going to show you some slides that simply show that the conventional model is not working for the majority of Americans. And so, this slide really talks about the most fundamental, basic idea around figuring out your income in retirement. So basically, the conventional model is you save money throughout retirement, or throughout your working years rather, and then in retirement you can draw, and the consensus in the investment community is about 4% of that retirement balance out of your retirement accounts for the very first year. And then each year thereafter, you can adjust that 4% withdrawal rate based on whatever inflation's doing. So another way to look at that is if you know how much money you want in retirement, how much money you want to live on, say you want to have $5,000 a month or $60,000 a year in retirement, then you would take that $60,000 a year, you would times it by 25, and that'd tell you that you need, $1.5 million. We're going to show you that that's probably not going to get done what you need to get done when you account for inflation. But this is just kind of to give you some broad context if you're thinking about how much money do I want to have in retirement, and in terms of income, and how much of a nest egg do I need to build. You should know the 4% rule. You can basically draw down 4% of your $1.5 million portfolio is $60,000 a year, or you can work the math backwards and times by 25 times the amount that you want to have each year. We can go to the next one, Mike.
Yeah, I was looking at this earlier, and I wasn't aware. This is something that really impacted me even just a few months ago as I was looking at this 4% rule, 25 times earnings. So earlier today, I was looking at this, how does this math work? So I was looking at it, I'm looking at this slide, like, does this really make, it wasn't making a lot of sense to me right off the bat, but basically we're saying if you're figuring 40,000 a year, which most of us, we're not going to live a comfortable life that we want to live in retirement at $40,000 a year. You would have to multiply 40,000 times 25. That's how much money you would need at the start of your retirement in order to draw that 4% out per year and not run out of money, at the end of the 30 years. That's the numbers are going to be staggering. And that's why we're putting this together, is to help everyone understand these rules. Because I worked at Fidelity. I've talked about retirement. I've looked at numbers, and we all just kind of think, oh, well, if I have $1 million, that's a great for retirement. I can retire, I'll have $1 million, I'll pull some out, it'll continue to grow. But not a lot of us don't do the actual math to say, what do I really need? And that's, hopefully we can give you some of those tools tonight to do that.
Yeah. And Mike, the next slide is from Charles Schwab, and basically they have their own tool to help people calculate how much of a nest egg they need in order to live comfortably in retirement. And they go about it like this. They actually break it down and they say, look, another way to think about it is how many years you plan to live in retirement, how many years you plan to have that nest egg support your lifestyle. And so they say that, if you plan for a 30-year retirement, if that's your planning time horizon, and you have a moderate asset allocation, meaning not too aggressive, not too conservative, then you can live on 3.4 to 4.1% of drawing down those assets. You can draw down those assets or withdraw 3.4 to 4.1% of those assets each year. If you have a planning time horizon or a retirement horizon of 20 years, then you can draw down a little bit more money. You can take 4.9 to 5.4%. And if you only have a 10-year time horizon, meaning if you work deep into your later ages, your later age, you could have a pretty conservative investment portfolio, and you could pull out 9 or up to 9.9%, they estimate, and still live very, very comfortably. But what I thought was interesting about this slide, Mike, and this information from Charles Schwab, if you look up in the top right-hand corner there, it says initial withdrawal rate, and then for a 75 to 90% confidence model. And that really got me thinking, like, wait a minute, I thought this was math. I thought if I had, the $1.5 million, 4% of that gives me $60,000 a year. I should be able to live comfortably for 30 years. Well, that's what sequence of returns risk is. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, because even with all of this modeling that they do, there are some things that can happen in the economy that can really push you back in terms of the number of years that your retirement income is going to last.
Yeah, I mean, I've got family members that they were getting ready to retire, early last year, and then the stock market took a 30% dip, yeah, in a matter of a few months, and that definitely altered some people's desire to retire right then, or maybe push it out another year.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's go on to the next slide, Mike, because I think we should talk about a little bit about inflation. And, for most of our lifetimes, adult lifetimes, let's just say, inflation wasn't really that big of a deal. We didn't really think about it. We didn't account for it. I know a lot of people in their retirement planning really weren't factoring that in, but we really need to start thinking about that. If we're moving into an era of higher inflation, we need to understand how inflation erodes your purchasing power. And that has to be factored into how much money you need in retirement. And that's when this stuff gets kind of scary. So we put together this chart, and basically in the top section showed if you want a $5,000 lifestyle in retirement, you need to have, based on the 4% or 25 times earning rule, you need to have $1.5 million in liquid assets in retirement. If you want a $10,000 a month lifestyle, you need to have 3 million. And if you want a 15,000, you need to have 4.5 million. But that does not take into account inflation. And we all know that the value of the dollar 20 or 30 years ago bought a lot more goods and services in the real economy than it does today. So if we just factor in 2.5% for inflation, meaning that the purchasing power, meaning that $5,000 today isn't going to be $5,000 of purchasing power in 20 years. In fact, you're going to need $8,193 in income in 2042 to equal the same amount of purchasing power today. And that's if we only see 2.5% average inflation over the next 20 years. So that means for a $5,000 a month lifestyle, you actually need 2.457 million. If you want a $10,000 lifestyle, which you'd equate a 10,000 lifestyle today, you need almost 5 million. And for a 15,000, you need over 7 million. And that's where these numbers get pretty dang daunting. And we'd like to, we'll get to a place here where we'll show you an alternative path that is a little more inflation adjusted.
Yeah, I think this is a slide that really kind of sent me spinning. Is like, go to my 30-year-old self. Oh yeah, I can live off of this. And you find some calculators online. Okay, well, I need 1.5 million. But you throw in that inflation calculation, like, crap, I need a whole nother million just to account for inflation to have this lifestyle that I thought I wanted. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And so we did some, I think this kind of gets into what we're going to talk about with sequence of return risks. And in fact, you know what, for this, Mike, I actually have a live interactive chart in front of me. Do you mind if, will you stop sharing for just a second and let me share? And then what I'm going to do is share an interactive screen here, because it makes it a lot easier to show this way.
I think this makes it better for everyone to get to see your flowing locks as well. I don't think they got to appreciate that as fully before.
Well, I'm glad we made time for that. I'm sure everybody is going to consider this a win now that we've done that. So team, the concept here is around what is called sequence of return risk. And really what we're just talking about is kind of clearly identifying, what could go wrong? Why is it in that Charles Schwab slide, it said that they have a 75 to 90% confidence level that your retirement's going to last 30 years? How come it's not 100% certainty? Well, one of the reasons is that the length of your portfolio longevity, how long that money is going to last in retirement, is based upon what the market is doing specifically early in your retirement years. And so when they run all these simulators, they call them Monte Carlo simulators, right? And they run all these different analysis to show how long your portfolio longevity is going to be. What they have found is that if you happen to retire in one of these periods where, let's say you retired in 1973, and then the stock market went down a lot. So now you're taking your 4% withdrawals, but now it's not really 4% because your portfolio is going down, down, down. I mean, this is the S&P 500. This is the largest 500 stocks in the United States. and the S&P went down from let's call it 780 down to 370. So you're talking about a stock market that went down by 50%. And if this is your first couple of years of withdrawals, and then check this out, this is January 1973, stock market didn't get back up to that 780, 800 level until 1987. So you basically had, what is that, a 15 years, Mike? You basically had 14 years. You had a 14-year period where you were drawing money out of your stock portfolio, but your stock portfolio, which was as much as 50% depressed. So if you retired in 1973 and you thought you had 30 years of income, you might only have 15 or 17 years of income because you were drawing it out during this period of a market pullback. Same thing, like, hey, if you decided to retire in the end of 21 and now the stock market's down from, let's call it 4,800 down to whatever that is, 39, 38. So, you're talking about a 20 to 23% decrease in the S&P 500. You now have 20% less longevity in that portfolio unless the market turns around and recovers pretty quickly. So I'll let you take the screen back, Mike, but I thought that was really important for people to understand that even if the models say that you're going to have that money and it's going to last a certain number of years, that's only 75 to 90% certainty that you're not going to retire at a period where you're going to have a pretty steep market pull down. You want me to run slides, Mike, or do you want to?
Yeah, if you want to run them, that's great since you're on there now.
Okay, you got it. So let me get my next slide pulled up for everybody and then I'll reshare. So this was a little analysis that Mike and I did. We were kind of just trying to figure out, how much money does somebody need to be saving and how does somebody get to a successful retirement? How does somebody build a successful retirement in the traditional model? And all these calculators are available online. We'll share a few of them with you in the chat as we go through the presentation. But I'd encourage you to check these out. But here's what we were trying to figure out: if somebody wanted $5,000 a month in today's dollars, today's lifestyle, assuming the 2.5% inflation, they're going to need $10,487 in 30 years, not in 20 years, but in 30 years, you're going to need $10,487 a month. Well, if we apply the 4% rule, that means you need about $1.57 million in savings. So how do we get there? Well, if this is our savings goal and we have 30 years to grow our retirement and we assume that we invest wisely and we get an 8% return over those 30 years, then then you would need to contribute $1,154 per month to get yourself to this would actually get you, if you take that 1.57 million and you factor in 4%, this is going to get you $5,233 a month in monthly income. So this gets you halfway to the 10,000 you need. So that's one way. But what we find is that people don't consistently contribute this high of a percentage of their income. We find that people start to contribute and then they go through a rough patch and they stop contributing. And then they start to contribute again, and then they want to buy a house and they pull the money out of their 401k. And so people don't seem to be consistent for 30 years contributing enough. But this would get you halfway to your goal of $5,000 a month lifestyle. The other half may come from Social Security. And those of you who don't know, you can actually log into Social Security and you can set up an account with them. And they will actually forecast for you and for the exact amount of money that you put into Social Security, they will actually forecast for you how much money you're going to have in retirement. I'll drop this into the chat right now. It's kind of a fun exercise, but this was a scenario we ran. Let me just drop this into the chat real quick. Everyone, there we go. This is a scenario we ran. Assuming that somebody retired at the age of 62, then they would get about $2,300 a month in income. If they decided to retire at 67, based on the age of this individual that we put in, that's kind of full benefit retirement. You'd get $3,400 a month. And if they delayed and worked until they were 70, they could get about $4,200 a month. So basically, where we're going with this. So that's just kind of how Social Security works. And then we actually ran a simulator to try to figure out how do we get to that $10,000 a month we needed in 30 years in order to have the $5,000 a month lifestyle. So if we went ahead and put $1,100 a month into our retirement every month, and that went at an 8% return, that would get us about $5,200 a month in income. And your retirement, this simulator was somebody born in 1987, and their retirement age was 65. So they retired in 2052, and they had a $60,000 a year earnings. And so in that scenario, they would have a benefit of $5,254 a month. So if someone took their Social Security at their full age, their full qualifying age, and if you consistently put your money into your retirement funds over 30 years without having any kind of catastrophic event or stopping to contribute, you can get to that $10,000 figure. Like it's possible. But here's the thing, team. It's not really working for most Americans. So this came out just recently. This is a study that came from Vanguard in, I think it was August of 22. And it basically said, by different age, how much money do Americans have saved for retirement? And they broke it down by median and average, and I'll define the differences of those two. But the median 65 plus year old had $87,700. So median is this: half of the population has more than that saved, half of the population has less than that saved, but that's the number right in the middle. And the average number would be the average of everybody 65 years or older. So let's say you had somebody who had $10 million stocked away in their retirement account, and then you had somebody who was at the median of 87,000. That would draw up the average, because the person that has the super savings would bring up the overall average. But the median is only 87,000. And even if you go with the average of 280,000, that's a lot, that's way short of the 1.5 million somebody would have needed to have 5,000 a month in income. So here's the reality. People are not consistently saving enough. Many do cash out, bought loans against their retirement accounts. Many stop contributing to retirement accounts when the market gets scary or they go through hard economic times. The sequence of return risk that Mike and I explained, that if you retire and then immediately thereafter the stock market goes down significantly, the length or duration of your retirement is tremendously shortened. That's a real risk. And inflation, as we've tried to show you, is something that most people, we don't believe, are adjusting for. Because 20 years ago, $280,000 in retirement, maybe they thought they could make it 10, 15 years off of that. But when gas is $5 and eggs are $5, you're not going to make it very far on 280,000. And if that trend continues, that's going to put a lot of people in retirement. The other question, or the other thing that for us to be thinking about here, is when we built that scenario, Mike, we assumed we had $5,000 a month in income from our 1.5 in investments and another $5,000 a month from our Social Security. But what if Social Security is not around in 20 or 30 years? Or what if it's not around in its current form? I was literally just reading an article on my phone that there's a current proposal from, I think it was from the Senate, to push back the age of retirement by something like 5 to 10 years. So I think that that's the probable future, is that the Social Security is going to get pushed back and back and back. And so you won't have access into that money until later in your years. So I'll then turn this over to you for comment here, Mike. But I think the point we wanted to make is there's a lot of risks out there, and the traditional model for saving with traditional assets in retirement just is not really working for most Americans. What would you add, buddy?
Yeah, as you say, the math doesn't add up, and I obviously want to steer as far away from anything political, Social Security, people's views on Social Security, whether it'll be there, whether it won't be there. It would be a huge political disaster if the Social Security went away, because that's what most people are banking on. So I'm sure there'll be a way to have it in some form or fashion. But like you said, it was originally set up with a life expectancy much lower than the current life expectancy of people. So logically, for the math to work on having Social Security, yeah, they've got to push the start date back to accommodate for the amount of draws that are going to, be taken from that. That's the reason why you get more money the longer you wait to draw, because once you die, that's done. They don't have to keep paying it. So they're incentivizing you to leave as much there, and they're gambling on you not taking out as much. So they'll give you a little bit more to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, really want to be respectful of everyone's time. We got to a little late start, so we're want to keep pushing hard on this. But yeah,
jump in.
I think that's where a lot of us aren't, saving in the 401k. The majority of people aren't saving, but those that are contributing to a company 401k, something like that, maybe maxing that out. That's $18,000 a year, $20,000 a year max. I mean, that's all we're putting away. That's not the $1,200 we were saying you needed to have just to have a $5,000 a month lifestyle. And the reality is, if you have that much extra money, you're able to put away into a retirement account. You're not living off of a $5,000 a month lifestyle. You probably have a job that's paying you more, and you are living off of a much higher than $5,000 a month lifestyle. Big thing with people contributing to 401k. Most of us have switched jobs at one time or another. So we switch employers. What do you do with that? Do you roll it over? A lot of people, like you said, Josh, cash it out, pull out some of that money, fix some things, cover a gap of unemployment. And those are just some of the things people run into. So going into this next slide, we're going to talk about two paths. You can stick to the one path, invest, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, build your portfolio, hope that it works out, hope Social Security's there, hope that your money lasts long enough, that you time it right. Or we can go this other route. We can go this route we're going to talk about tonight, which is purchase a few homes. Not a lot. We're not talking astronomical things. We're talking minor tweaks, big pushes right now. They're going to pay astronomical benefits to you for the rest of your life and your children's lives. And that's option two. Purchase a few homes that generate cash flow over time, allow that cash flow to fund your retirement. And then when you pass on, your heirs get that property and the cash flow, which doesn't run out as long as they maintain that property.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about you die, you leave this chunk of money, you die, tons of benefits. We'll get into stepped up basis and stuff like that. But then that's going to just keep giving them the money. And it's without even taking anything from it. That asset continues to stay there and grow, and they get that money, after you're long gone. So,
yeah, and Mike, I would offer there's a third path, which is a combination of both of these, because that's what you and I do, right? We fund our 401ks, we try to put some money in some brokerage accounts, but our primary, what we're really banking on, is the cash flow from our rental properties, and then that traditional type of investment in our retirement accounts is really for just liquidity and emergencies, and it's a safety net, So Rich Dad Poor Dad was one of the most influential books on myself. I know it's true for Mike, and I encourage anyone who hasn't read the book to read it. It's the most popular and most sold financial literacy book ever. And in that book, Robert Kiyosaki teaches us that there's really 5 ways that you get paid through real estate. And so we thought we should, talk about that really quickly. The first is appreciation. We've all had incredible appreciation over the last few years. The value of the home goes up. The second way is amortization. So every month when you make your mortgage payment, you're actually taking a piece of that principal and you are paying it off. So that's forced savings. And in the case that you're a real estate investor, your tenant is paying your forced savings, right? They're actually paying down your mortgage indebtedness for you. Cash flow, of course, is very important in real estate. We want to make sure that we have positive cash flow to cover the mortgage payment from our rent, and that positive cash flow grows over time. We're going to show you some illustrations of that. And then depreciation. If you qualify for some of the incredible tax deductions that are available to real estate investors, the truth is you can completely avoid paying taxes. And we may have time to get in a little bit of that. Again, we're not CPAs. We're not licensed financial advisors. We play in the real world. We have rental properties. We have investment properties all over Utah. And we know this from what we've learned by actually doing it in the real world and what we've learned from our CPAs. And then lastly is rent inflation. And we're going to go into this. This is something that a lot of people don't really think about. But, I bought my first 8-plex 20 years ago with my mother. And when we bought that property, the average rent in that building, they were renting for $275 to $315 a month. 2 bedrooms, 850 square feet, right on Capitol Hill in Salt Lake. 20 years later, we're renting those units for $1,500 a month. So that's a 500% increase in rent in 20 years. Now, we've poured a lot of the cash flow from that property back into the improvements of the property, but we're going to show you some illustrations of how rent inflation can really make you comfortable in retirement. So I'm going to rapid fire through this, Mike, if it's okay for time.
Yeah, for sure.
But this is a case study that Mike and I put together to look at the 5 ways that real estate investors are paid. So the first is appreciation. So let's say in 2022, you bought a $600,000 home, and 20 years later in 2042, based on a 4% annual appreciation rate, which by the way, the appreciation rate in Utah going back over the last 30 years has been well above 5%. So 4% is a reasonable rate. That means you'd have a property worth $1.314 million. So that's one way you get paid in real estate. The value goes up over time. Another way you get paid in real estate is amortization. So let's just say that person put 20% down on that $600,000 home. They took out a $480,000 mortgage. And let's just assume a 5.5 interest rate, because you have to do that to run an amortization schedule. You have to pick an interest rate. And so if we follow that over 20 years, the mortgage balance went down from $480,000 to $251,000. And oh, by the way, who was making that payment every month? Yes, your tenant that you were renting to was paying down your mortgage balance over that 20 years. And then the other way is cash flow. And this is what almost nobody talks about. And I only, know it so intimately, and I'm so passionate about it because I've seen it completely change my financial trajectory. And that is the rent inflation that I was talking about. If we think about a 4% annual rent increase, which, in the example I gave you, if you reinvest some of that cash flow over the years into the property and continually upgrade it and increase the economic viability of that asset, you can really beat a 4% annual rent increase. This is kind of like if you do bare minimum, but if you're actually doing capital improvements, you can beat this number, very easily. But this illustrates, if you had $2,800 a month in income in 22, 4% annual increases, by year 20, you'd have $6,135 a month in income. So let's add it all up. You have a home value of $1.314 million. You have a loan balance of $251,000. So you have over $1 million in equity in that property. You have rental income of $6,135 a month. And if you had a fixed rate mortgage payment based on that scenario we put in, your mortgage payment would be $2,725. You'd have that's based on, putting the 20% down at the 5.5% rate. You'd have a $2,725 payment. And you would, at 20-year mark, you'd have cash flow of $3,410. But this really doesn't tell the whole story, because what I know about holding properties for 20 years is I've refinanced them 2 or 3 times. So I started out with a $2,725 payment, but as the economy slows, interest rates will go down. and we'll have an opportunity to refinance that payment even lower. So, the reality is in 20 years, you could have a lot more cash flow than that 3410. And then the other thing we mentioned here is, the other thing you could do with this equity to kind of bring that equity to life at this point, you could do a cash out refinance down the road. If you pulled out 75% loan to value, that LTV stands for loan to value, you could pull out $734,000 cash in hand. And if we assume a 5.5% interest rate, you'd only have a payment of $55.95. You'd still have a about a $600 a month positive cash flow, $500, something like that, $500 a month positive cash flow. And you'd be able to pull out that $734,000. So if you think about it this way, this is like having $1 million investment portfolio. Because if you take that 3410 a month in positive cash flow, right, and then we times that by 12, that gives us 4,092. No, excuse me. I missed a number there. 3410 times 12 months. That gives you 40,920 per year in cash flow. We use the old trusty rule of 25. That's like having $1 million stock portfolio that you're pulling 4% per month out of. And so, team, the construct here, the idea here is to ask ourselves, what's easier? Is it easier to buy a home as a primary residence, live in it for a few years, and then turn it into an investment property and buy another primary residence and do that 2 or 3 or 4 times over a 20-year period? Or is it easier to save millions of dollars in the stock market? And I believe that the people that take this real estate investor path are likely to have a more secure retirement, more inflation adjusted, and have a lot less stress. Mike, I'm going to pause there. What would you add before we go into stepped up basis?
Yeah, I just want to kind of really interject here. So a lot of people think, well, I don't, if I have all my money in real estate and I, have a house that's got $1 million in equity, and I pull that money out, that's not a taxable event. You do a cash out refinance, that is cash in hand. You're not selling the property, not a taxable event. So you just took that distribution, not from an IRA, but you took it from the house in a cash out refinance. It's not a taxable event. That is cash tax-free money.
Great point, Mike. That's exactly right. If you would have sold the house, paid all the taxes, you perhaps, assuming it's an investment property, not a primary residence, but you perhaps would have only pulled that much money out after taxes and real estate commissions anyways, as you got out on a cash out refinance.
And in my limited time doing this, I don't date back as far as 20 years like Josh, but I see, one of my great realtor friends is on here right now. But I bought one of my properties, this crazy appreciation we had. I had a few of them refinanced. I pulled that cash out. I turned around and bought another property with that. They're still cash flowing. They're still making their money. But now I have another property that somebody else is paying for. Somebody else is building up that retirement. It's not me. But, you can take that cash out and just exponentially increase it over that, 20-year time that it's growing.
Yeah. And, we didn't mention this in the introductions because we got rolling so fast in my tech issues, but, my mother, my wife and I, over the last 22 years now, we've been real estate investing together. We've acquired over 200 rental units in Utah. And we did it exactly the way Mike said. We bought a property. A few years later, we raised the rents. We improved the property over that period of time. We pulled money out. And then we use that money to go buy another property. And then at first, the dominoes are pretty slow. Every year, every couple of years, we bought a property. Then all of a sudden, we sold 6 of them and we bought an 8-plex. A few years later, we pulled cash out of that and bought a 16-plex. And it's like a snowball going down the mountain. And at first, it's just a little tiny flake of snow. But over 20 years, if you keep playing the game and you have equity and cash flow to play the game with, the snowball gets really big.
Now, this is not a get rich quick scheme. This is not flipping a house and making a bunch of money. This is the long play. Those first rental properties, I was pretty thin. I was pretty skinny on cash flow. One of the realtors I was speaking with, I think this townhome might be overpriced, paying $300,000, now it's for $500,000. But the numbers worked enough to justify it, knowing that they were paying down some principal, it had some tax advantages. And now, even after the refinance, it's plenty cash flow. So the game's pretty skinny. It's at the start in most cases, but definitely, yeah, snowballs, picks up over time.
I don't think I ever bought a private property that I didn't think I was paying too much for at the time. But that building that we bought, that 8-unit building, I believe we paid $350,000 for that building. And 20 years later, you look back and that building's worth $2.5 million. So in the rear view mirror, that was a hell of a deal. At the current moment, I was like, oh my gosh, I hope we can make the payment on this thing. So
Yeah.
that is very normal. Jeff Guy, thanks for the question. He said, what are your thoughts on short-term VRBO versus long-term rentals? Mike does more in nightly rentals than I do. That's not my expertise. Although I have been reading recently that some of the vacancy rates in VRBOs are starting to go up as the economy is cooling a little bit, and inflation is taking out of people's budgets. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Long-term rentals for me, like literally, I have houses that we've had for over a decade that I've been to once, and it's just we have a maintenance team that goes and does the renovations. We do everything, online and virtual in terms of applications, and they just roll, and people have been in them for very long periods of time. So for me, I like long-term rentals. Mike, what would you say on the VRBO side?
VRBOs are sexy. There's a lot more cash to be made in a lot of cases for those, but there's a lot more maintenance, a lot more management fees, a lot more moving parts. We've got one for those here in Utah, up in Huntsville, that does really well. We bought it because we like to go there and wanted somebody else to pay for us to be able to go there. And it more than pays for itself. But there's a lot more. Again, that's more of a quick hit and can be really lucrative. But like Josh talked about, you're stuck with cyclical stuff, with people not vacationing. COVID shut a lot of that down. Where with long-term rentals, they still got to pay rent. People still need places to live, even during a pandemic. So yeah, definitely pros and cons to both. I like having a mix. Like with any kind of investment portfolio, I've got a little bit in commercial, some commercial investments that we've done together, some short-term rentals, some long-term rentals. I think it's a good mix, but it's not. I don't think the VRBO is a way to build the long-term wealth like some of these other things we're talking about on the monthly rental, on the long-term rentals.
Jeff, look into midterm rentals. I've been hearing a lot of good things about midterm rentals. Midterm rentals are anything, I think they call them from 30 days to 6 months. And I've been hearing there's a lot of demand for midterm rentals, mostly leasing to businesses that have families they need to put up in homes for midterm. So check out online. Bigger Pockets is a great source for all kinds of info on short-term, midterm rentals. All right, so Mike, you alluded to tax benefits and stepped-up basis. So let's dive into this. A stepped-up basis is an adjustment to the value of the appreciated assets upon inheritance. And this is an IRS rule. And again, we're not CPAs. Consult with yours, get professional advice. But basically what the IRS says is if mom and dad hand down a property to the kids, you get to readjust the value of the property for what you pay taxes on to the IRS. So let's run through a quick scenario here. You purchased a home in 2022 for $600,000, and it's that same case study. In 2042, it's worth $1.3 million. And you owed about $250,000 on the loan. So it's that same case study scenario we talked about earlier. Now, one thing to know, and a lot of people don't understand this, is that the loan amount on your home has nothing to do with your tax implications. That's not how taxes are calculated. Taxes are calculated based on the basis. So the basis is if I buy a property for $600,000 and I put $50,000 in renovations and upgrades, and then it costs me $50,000 in real estate commissions and loan costs and whatnot to sell the property, then the basis is the original acquisition cost plus your investment into the property plus any cost to sell the property. So in this scenario, let's just assume that the basis was just 600,000, the original purchase price. So in this scenario, the sales price, which was the 1.3 million that it's worth in 2042, minus the basis, which let's just assume there was no real estate commissions. I'm just trying to make it super simple. And there was no improvements made in the property. So the taxable basis is 600K. The difference between what they sold it at and the basis typically would be you'd have to pay taxes on. So in this scenario, you would have to pay capital gains on $700,000. Sales price minus basis. Basis is your purchase price plus improvements plus any cost to sell. And that equals what you're going to pay capital gains on. But the stepped up basis rule says no. You get to revalue the basis, reassess the basis of the property upon the date that the parents pass away and give the property over to their kids, if that's what they determine to do. So based on this stepped up basis rule, I could have, as a parent, I could have a basis of 600,000, but when I die, my kids immediately go out and get an appraisal or a broker price opinion, and it comes back at 1.3 million, and I save that for my tax return. Now my basis isn't 600. Now my kids' basis, I'm dead at this point, but now my kids' basis, what they're going to pay taxes on is not the 600,000 that was my basis. No, they get a stepped up basis. So they get a value of 1.3. And then if they sell the home for 1.3, it's a non-taxable event. So you get to increase that tax basis as you pass on real estate from generation to generation. So now, if you didn't do that, let's say the parents sold the property and then died. Well, in this scenario, if they were paying capital gains, long-term capital gains on a $700,000 difference between the home value and the parent's basis, they could have capital gains in the order of $179,000. So, you always want to be aware that if you're thinking about selling a property, don't until the parents die, and let the kids get the stepped up basis so you can preserve your asset there not to be spent on taxes. Mike, what would you add there?
No, I mean, this is actually something that just came about recently as well with the stepped up basis, I believe, right?
Well, all of the laws around the tax segregation study were updated in 2017, went into impact in 2018. But I don't know, honestly, when the stepped up basis came around. I think this has been around a little longer than that.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, that's huge. Just your kids, that's just that much more money we're leaving to the kids. And again, they don't even have to sell it. They can keep running it and getting all the benefits we talked about earlier. So
Yep.
We've gotten into a lot of detail on a lot of this stuff, but I mean, sure, people are wanting, that's great. I don't have $80,000. I don't have $200,000 laying around. How do I start? How do I get there? And I think that's where we need to go now.
Yeah. And we're going to go through some high level here, Mike, but ultimately people need to have a investing consultation with you and have you advise them on all the different ways that how to access capital and how to use leverage responsibly to help people build a real estate portfolio. I've watched you do it over the last couple of years, and you've done it amazingly. So you really have to, the devil's in the detail to find real opportunities. But here's a few house hacking ideas. You can buy a single family home and rent out rooms. This is exactly what Mike is doing with his kids right now. And this here where it says kiddie condos, what Mike has done is basically bought homes with his college aged kids, and then they rent out the homes, the rooms, they live in it for a year or so. Then they move out of it and buy another owner occupied. So you can do that with low down payment and the best possible interest rates. And then they rent, the old home turns into a full-time rental. The new one, kid moves into and rents out all the rooms. So that's a really good house hacking idea. Another way is to add a basement apartment or an apartment above a garage or casita. The cities are really opening up their codes around that. So maybe you already have a home and you would, you could pull out a home equity loan or get a construction loan and you could build a additional dwelling unit, ADU, on a home that you already own. That's a possibility. You could buy a duplex and you could rent out the other half. And you could even rent rooms in your half. So we had a client who bought a duplex. He rented one half out to a family, and then he rented out 2 of the 3 rooms on his house to his he was actually in medical. I think he was a resident or a fellow. So he rented them out to other people that were going to the medical school or in the residency program. And he was cash flow positive on the whole deal, meaning he lived literally for free and covered the mortgage and had additional cash flow. Another idea is the second homes and nightly rentals. We talked about that a little bit. What Mike has done is bought a second home. They love to go vacation there. They love to take the family there, but they rented out the other portion of the year that they're not living in that second home. And that's a great way to do it. You can partner with a trusted friend, like Mike and I have done, like we've done with some of our real estate partners. We have brought them alongside us and we have said, hey, you come up with half the cash, and you come up with a quarter of the cash, and let's pool our money together and let's buy the property, in some sort of an entity that we all own a portion of. You can consider investing out of state. We get emails all the time from an investment group that has cash flow positive markets in places like Iowa and South Dakota and Kentucky, and their cash flow is exceptional. So that's a great idea. You can buy and move every few years. I mean, I don't know why people don't do this more. They have this dogma that they should sell their home and move the equity into another home. But, I have a young man who works with me. I think Sam is 20. I don't know. What is Sam, like 26 years old, 27 years old?
Probably 27. Yeah, somewhere in there, mid 20s, late 20s.
He's a young kid, but when he was 20, him and his wife bought their first property on 100% financing loan. They lived in it for 2 years. They refinanced to a lower rate. Instead of selling that property, they rented that property out. They had a baby. They moved to a new property. They've now done that 3 times. And the kid's, he's on paper, he's a millionaire. I mean, he has positive cash flow. He has over $1 million in equity because he made the decision, I'm going to buy, refinance, rent it out, and then I'm going to move and buy myself a new home. And he's done that in 7 years. It's incredible. And that's the BRRRR method, team. And this is a little bit of a different method, but BRRRR stands for buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and then repeat. So a lot of people will buy a property, fix it up, jack up the rents because it's not newly renovated, refinance all their equity out, and then use that money to go buy another house. So the point is, there's more solutions to getting into being a real estate investor than you're probably thinking. And it doesn't require a tremendous amount of money. Here's a couple other options. As it relates to owner-occupied homes, there's a lot of programs with very low down payments. I have a physician client who's bought 3 different homes on 100% financing with physician loans, and he's turned them all into rental properties. So he's got 2 cash flow positive properties, the property he's in, and he's never put $1 in down payment in. And then, other ideas of where you can get down payments, home equity lines, 401k, gift from family, Roth IRA, tax refund, seller can cover your closing costs. We're seeing that big time right now. And then OPM is just other people's money, which means, essentially partner. So the point is, and the reason why I suggest you end up doing a consultation with Mike is because there's probably a lot of options to get you moving down this path that you may not have even considered.
So
hey,
let's
Mike,
look at a couple of these comments in the chat real quick.
You got it.
So Jeff, I appreciate reaching out. Those out-of-state investment opportunities, I'm going to be honest, that's something that scared me a little bit initially. I'm like, it's out there. I can't touch it. I can't see it. I can't feel it. But I mean, it's the same thing with our stocks, our mutual funds. I mean, we're just buying into something and trusting a fund manager to manage it. We can help you get in touch with some of those people. I've got some friends that recently did some of these in Alabama. really cheap, $300,000. They, pulled some money, bought some stuff. Another guy we work with, Drake, he's got some out in Kentucky. And that again goes to Jacqueline, your comments, it's an affordability issue. It totally can be. I mean, in Utah, it's really hard to cash flow right now to buy a property and have it cash flow with what you would need to collect in rent versus what you're paying for it. So that's where, yeah, you need to start looking maybe out of state to some of these other options where they do cash flow and it is cheaper to get into some of these places. The affordability issue, that's where those house hacking things, I didn't necessarily have or want to go in to buy a place for my kid to live in college and put $80,000 down. I got to 20,000 because I did the 5% using, my kids to live in there as their primary home. And we've done that on a few different properties. So the affordability issue is definitely looking at some of the programs and looking at some of those out of state. So Jeff, you can, we can take that offline and I can help you gain access to some of those. I've got realtors I work with throughout the country that definitely, can help us get access to some of those. And like Josh said, we've got people sending us emails all the time of properties they have that are perfect for investing out of state.
Hey, I just dropped in the chat, Mike. There's this thing called a price to rent ratio. And basically it compares, how high is the price of the home relative to the rents in the area. And I just dropped a link in the chat. This gives you the price to rent ratio in the 50 largest US cities. So the most expensive relative to the rents in the market, actually, if you don't mind, Mike, this is so cool. I'll just share this. And you can find this information on the internet all over the place, but the most expensive place that has the worst price to rent ratio, San Jose, California, followed by San Francisco. For a $1.26 million home, you're going to get $2,500 a month in rental income. Tell me how that pencils. That's a $10,000 mortgage, $2,500 a month in rent. So that does not work in San Jose, San Francisco. Here's Seattle, Washington. I think somebody said Washington, right? These are terrible price to rent ratios. It's never going to work. On the other side of the spectrum is places like Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, Milwaukee, where a $75,000 house is going to get you, what is that, like $1,300 a month in rent, $13,000 a year. So these things start to make a lot of sense. Now, here's what I would overlay over the top of this, and we're going to give you, a download for that Mike's provided to kind of give further advice on this. But don't just look at the price to rent ratio, because if the economy in Detroit, Michigan is contracting, if they're losing jobs versus adding jobs, if their incomes are going down versus up, if companies are moving out versus in, then even though the economics of that might look good, they could get worse. Like, you know what I mean? The values and the rents could continue to go down because the economics of the city are just kind of imploding. But there's data like this that Mike can share with you.
So I'm trying to reply on here, but for some reason my reply is not going out to everyone. So Laura, maybe there's a misunderstanding there. When you do a cash out refinance, you're still going to own the home. You're definitely still own the home and you're reaping all those benefits. You just don't pay taxes because you didn't sell it. But yeah, when you do a cash out, you can take it, buy another one, but you still own the home. You're just pulling some of your chips off the table and putting them somewhere else. So,
and by the way, Jacqueline asked, who do you use for physician loans? I'm looking for a referral. Yeah, that is that's interesting. Mike, do you know anybody?
Let's see. That's a big fat pitch coming across the base. Yeah, so that's a majority of what we do at Neo Home Loans in our particular branch is we work with physicians all across the country, relocating, tons of options. How we said, Jackie, yeah, let's take that offline. That's not what we were going for with this presentation, but that's a huge soft pitch over the plate. I appreciate it. I can definitely help you out with that.
Cool.
Yeah. So Laura, again, yeah, when the tenant's still paying the mortgage, they're paying the same rent payment they've always paid, which was more than the original mortgage we had. But then when we do the refinance, yeah, the payment's going to go up a little bit depending on rate and how much cash you pull out. But theoretically, they're still paying enough in rent that there's a gap between what our new mortgage payment is, what the tenant's paying. They don't know. They don't have anything to do with us doing the refinance. They still live in the home. They still pay their rent. we're adjusting our cash flow amounts based on the refinance. Yeah, we still own the home. We just pulled that money out to either buy other properties, or if you're late in your retirement, you pull out that $734,000 distribution to take your family on a trip or do whatever it is you do with it.
Yeah, or diversify into other investments.
Yep.
You want to go over this one, Mike?
Yeah, for sure. So then versus now, I see a lot of my realtor, friends, partners on here, and it's been a nightmare. 20 and 21 was just realtors were getting run ragged. Going out, people are offering over asking price, multiple offers, no contingencies, your firstborn, letting him come stay in the house for 2 weeks out of the year. Money, interest rates were super low. Anybody could buy a house. And so there were so many people trying to buy, that if you were going in trying to do one of these house hacking things, a VA, an FHA loan, a 5% down, you were just, you weren't even in the game. You were getting kicked aside. And so barriers to entry were totally different than they are now. Now in 2022, to present, money's more expensive. Rates have doubled. This is the biggest increase we've seen in interest rates in 2022 ever. But there is more inventory to choose from. You're able to look at houses. You're able to, ponder on them, think about them. There's a little bit more to look at. You're able to write up contracts to protect you as the buyer versus the seller having all the leverage. That's a whole nother webinar on buy down strategies, getting the sellers to pay money to get cheaper payments to make it more affordable for you. So we can get you back to a pre 7% interest rate payment because you're able to negotiate with the sellers. So you have a lot more protection as a buyer. You can do your inspections. You can make sure everything checks out, where in 20 and 21, you just couldn't do that. So that, that's more of the negotiating power as well. And that's awesome for, buyers agents. So buyers that can qualify, now's the time to do it. I know people feel like, oh, I'm way overpaying for this house. This interest rate is just something I'm not comfortable with or not used to. That can be fixed. But right now, you have the leverage as a buyer to buy a home. You can go in, you can negotiate, you can pick from what's out there and what's available. Pay the rate, marry the house. Yes, thanks, Laura. That's definitely it. You own the house. So when rates do drop, if you go out and you buy your house now, you're not in the fray. You own the home. You can refinance with anyone next summer, preferably me, but you can definitely refinance. You're not in competition at that time for the rate. You've got the house. Everyone else that's been waiting is going to be just right back in that koi pond feeding frenzy, trying to get the houses because rates are lower. You got the house. You're just going to refinance the lower rate. You're sitting back watching the bonfire. You're just eating popcorn if you buy the house now and refinance later versus waiting to try to buy, when rates are low and everyone's coming out of the woodwork again.
Yeah, and that's really why I took us to this slide, Mike, because I think the question is, what do you think is going to happen to the real estate market if interest rates go back to 4.5%? And that's what Fannie Mae is projecting. And Fannie Mae's team of economists have been one of the most accurate interest rate forecasters in the market over the 20 years I've been in the mortgage world. And basically what Fannie Mae looks at is what they think is going to happen to inflation and what they think is going to happen to the economy. Those are really what drives mortgage interest rates. And Fannie Mae their analysts are saying that they are projecting a slowdown in the economy, i.e. the recession, that is going to bring down inflation, that will bring down mortgage rates and make housing more affordable. And with the massive housing shortage that we have, right now there's about 1.3 million homes for sale in the entire country. And there's 130 million households. If you compare that to 2007, in 2007, there was 116 million households, so 14 million less households in the country, and there was 4 million homes for sale. So we have 14 million more households, and we have 1.3 versus 4 million homes for sale. So you're talking about 2.7 less million homes that are available for sale. So as soon as interest rates go down, demand is going to come back, and we still have this issue of shortfall in housing. Anything else you want to add there, Bud?
No, I mean, we're skipping through some of these slides just to try to answer people's questions, which is awesome. Thank you so much for reaching out and helping us with that. But, and somebody mentioned, do we really think rates are going to go down to 4.5? I mean, it's what's projected. You know, a recession's on the horizon. I think that's one of our previous slides as well, that we can only keep increasing interest rates. The Fed keeps meeting so long before we have a correction. Things will go down. Unemployment's, we were, read a recent article, unemployment's starting to get there. And really the only way to get out of the recession is to, lower rates and get people moving again. We have a lot of jobs depending on the mortgage industry: real estate agents, appraisers, title companies, mortgage loan officers. I mean, it's a huge industry that, depends on these, and rates will get down. Don't know, 4.5, it's on the table. Everyone is forecasting. People that are paid a lot more to be a lot smarter than we are definitely forecasting, us to get down to that 4.5% range again, for sure.
Yeah, and I think this is just the last slide before your final slide where people can schedule some time with you, Mike. But I think this slide is really important. And the reality is that those that buy and wait are wealthier than those who wait to buy. And if you can buy and wait and have somebody else pay your mortgage by paying you monthly rent, and you can do that 2 or 3 times throughout your life and hold those properties as you increase the rent, as the values go up, and as your mortgage goes down, you've got a lot better chance to have built a successful retirement, because you're losing that leverage of the mortgage to get you into that asset. And if we look at home price appreciation, this is cumulative across the entire United States. This takes the good states, the bad states, the good economies, the bad economies. Over the last 30 years, you've had 307% cumulative appreciation in the United States. But take a look at Utah. Utah is the fastest appreciating real estate market in the entire country. The Kim Gardner Institute came out with this quote just earlier this year. And one of the things that the Kim Gardner Institute, that's the Policy Institute, Economic Policy Institute at the University of Utah, one of the things that they said is by 2050, that they did a long 30-year economic forecast. They said that Salt Lake, Provo, and Ogden, so moving from Ogden down to Provo, will be the same size demographically in terms of the size of the economy and the number of people living here as Bellevue, Tacoma, and Seattle, Washington. And the average house price in those places, I think the median home price is $785,000. So, if the economy continues to run and the demographics continue to increase, you can only build so many homes. And when you have scarcity in any asset class, over time, that value of those assets are likely to go up, which really isn't that important to me. But what's important to me is that the rental income is going to go up. Mike, I'll let you end on this slide, bud.
Yeah, so I mean, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. It would be great to have the house, that Josh, his 8-plex that he bought 20 years ago at whatever price. I look back, I would love to have the condo I first bought when my wife and I first got married for $73,000. It wasn't in the cards. I didn't know this stuff. I didn't know to keep that and do a home equity line of credit to pull my cash out, or borrow money from the 401k, even though we're talking about putting money in retirement, borrow money to buy my next house and keep that as a rental. Those are things I didn't know. These are things hopefully you guys can teach your kids. I want you to schedule a consultation with me so I can teach you how to get prepared, how to get there. I can go into things where I set my kids up with their own credit cards. So as soon as they turned 18, they had a credit score so that I could help them buy a house and do that with me. Going in with partners, the Airbnb that I own it with my mother-in-law. She wanted to go in, I wanted to go in. So partnering up with people to get into that. It's scary. It's, taking on an investment, it's a risk, but you know what, I'm putting as much as I can and feel comfortable into my retirement, into the stocks, whatever, but having these other people building my retirement for me, having other people build those assets for me, having that cash flow come in to where, I'm not as worried about my job on a day-to-day, because you've got this passive income coming in from other sources, not to mention your retirement, to go along with the other assets you've got, your 401ks, your social security, whatever it is. There's just so much out there that I think educating people on the options that they do have, that it doesn't need to be scary. There are cheap ways to do this. There are easy ways to get into it. Jeff, I know you were on here, you got kids, similar to my kids' ages, and, being able to help them. Jordan, I see you on here too. These are things you guys need to think about, things you need to be preparing for, and it's going to make retirement a lot more attainable for a lot of us to have multiple options feeding into our retirement, not just all of our eggs in one basket. So love to be a resource for any of you guys, just to have these conversations. If I already have one rental, is the only way to pull the equity from it, or is a refi? Yeah, Jeff, pretty much. The only way to pull that equity out is to do a refinance. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's where the dilemma of, oh, my current rate is this versus my new rate. And, now may not be the time to do it. We may want to wait till it's another dip. Now may be the time, depending on what you are going to do with the money. But yeah, pulling the equity out. A HELOC isn't, I know somebody mentioned a HELOC, but HELOCs aren't readily available on investment properties. That's a downside on a HELOC. You can, in rare cases, find some, but a HELOC is more for a primary residence, not so much an investment property. So just kind of keep that distinction out there with HELOCs. But thanks a lot for everyone that came. Thanks for your time. I know we went definitely over our times. We lost some people along the way. We gained some people along the way. But Josh is still posting stuff in the comment. We can make this recording. Did we hit record, Josh? I don't know that we did. Dang it.
Yeah, Colin saved us.
Oh, he did? Okay, yeah. So we are recording this. So anybody that wants us to go back and look at it, we'll be glad to share it with you. Just, DM me, email me, text me, whatever. We can get this out to you so you can share it with, friends. Teach it to your kids. Help them get off to a great start. Teach it to your family members. Don't hold this information. Just share it. And I want everyone to be able to retire. It's the dream. And the way to achieve it at an earlier age than 80 years old, working through your retirement, is going to be to have multiple avenues. And this is a huge lift in that direction.
Hey, and anybody who didn't see the chat on the midterm rentals, Laura talked about a very successful investment that she has with midterm rentals. And then I dropped a podcast from Bigger Pockets. That's a investment website that I follow. And they just did a podcast just barely a couple of days ago. It looks like a couple of weeks ago, on a podcast on midterm rentals. So these are, 30 days to 6 month rentals. And the title of this podcast was how to double your rent checks, how to double your cash flow out of small properties with midterm rentals. So very interesting ideas there. And if Mike and I can do anything else for you, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, and Rachel, thanks for acknowledging it. Yeah, this is a commitment of time for me and Josh. We love doing it. I mean, we're super passionate about this. We live it, we do it, and we're grateful to share it with you guys. So thanks for coming in and giving us your time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks, Mike. Great job.